Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Moss. I've heard a lot of positive and awesomeness about everyone, and I can't wait to hang out with you at the Wexner Center during your visit. Hope the Pages program has been going well for everybody. Even though it's been rough for me in the Pages program, it's still a very positive experience because, as you know, we didn't get to explore the after Picasso exhibition, and then the snow and the weather conditions didn't really allow us to hang out yet. But it's cool, you know. So um, no worries. Well, due to technology, we can do cool things like this PowerPoint. So let's go and get it started. So no Purifoy, junk data. So when you think of data, what comes into your head? If anyone knows anything about data, if not, just remember this key factor. Think of what's his name? Duchamp. Think of Duchamp. That's the guy who did our mutt, right? The toilet. Da our mutt. Thankfully we have the internet. These are called ready-mades. You put this inside of a of a gallery and said, "Here's my art." Our mutt. I was able to see this in real life, which was great. It was a cool experience. So this idea changed the perception of what would be represented in the gallery as art. So that's Dada, the idea of taking the normal and putting it in a different context and giving it a different language, a different narrative. So as a tester, let's examine this piece before we go into the PowerPoint. So what do you see when you look at this picture? If we look here, you can see the handle of an umbrella. This looks kind of like a cage of a cage to a like some sort of bird cage maybe, but it represents some sort of house, right? Maybe that looks like a car. Maybe that's like a wall right there. But you can see the rest of the umbrella right there. The top part's facing us. Every time I look at this, I think of this as a roulette wheel or a fan, right? A lot of students think of this picture as a carnival or a Ferris wheel. Purifoy was using his imagination, so you can see this represents maybe like a sculpture and a painting because it hangs on a wall. So, and this is all made out of trash, right? So think about how cool that is that he's literally taking trash, and making these beautiful pieces of work, which we'll explore when you come into the gallery. So we'll go through this really quickly. It's a PowerPoint, a little dry, so we'll try to make it as fast as possible. Born August 17th, 1917, Snow Hill, Alabama, roughly 40 years into Jim Crow. So if any of you know anything about Jim Crow, it is what came out of that essentially is segregation. During the what's that, baby? Oh, sorry. Cool. No worries. I thought my girlfriend had asked me a question, so it's all good. So anyway, so the after Reconstruction, where they were developing equality and new standards for former slaves, they created this bill, these laws, which essentially separated the minorities from the rest of the community, obviously blacks in this case, right? So obviously it's pervasive in the South, more so, but this would come to affect everyone in the nation in the long term, and we'll explore that when we get to that point. So during this time, Purifoy received his undergrad from Alabama State University in 1939, volunteered in the Navy up through 1945, which, at the time it was more common to do that. but that doesn't exempt Purifoy from that doesn't exempt him from his excellence. I don't want you to think that it was that passive, because all these things affect his artwork. He received his master's from Atlanta University in '48. Then after that, he moved to Cleveland, Ohio, which is cool. That's your connector. That's your superficial connector. He moved there to pursue social work, and then he received his BFA in '56 from CalArts. The cool thing about this is right when we're coming out of Jim Crow. So you can see that Purifoy, where it states Purifoy was the first African American to enroll at CalArts as a full-time student, which is like he's like, setting new standards, breaking social norms, right? So he's getting these milestones and becoming legendary, and he's just now going into the arts. So that kind of like validated him going into the art world. Like it may, I can't speak on his behalf, but it probably felt like a new frontier if I was there as an artist, or that like he's the first to like, you know, define what black artists would be coming out of CalArts. So it's definitely a very inspiring time for him. 64, founding director of the Watts Tower and Art Center. And this is where you started getting programs out of, like the social programs where he worked with kids, inner city kids. He had like a reform program there where he would get people that weren't in school back into school. So if you're not familiar with the Watts Towers, check these out. These awesome. So beautiful. They were built by one man. As you can see here, they're made out of like, I can't tell what they're made out of. Maybe metal, cement, and then he puts glass in it. You can see the glass bottles there. Beautiful stuff. There's the Watts Towers in GTA 5, which is kind of funny, but that just tells you how iconic those towers are, even though with them being in a video game, right? So let's zip through this. Now in '65 was the Watts Rebellion, or as the news was coining it, the Watts Riots. This is an extension out of the Jim Crow. Now, even though like the Jim Crow laws may have not have like superficially extended out that far, those theories, ideas, conditions migrate and disseminate throughout the nation over the course of time. So what happened in Watts is that there was no jobs for the people that lived there. There was poor housing conditions, and they were fed up. So most of you were born in like 99, 98. So think about the Rodney King beating, which caused the riots there, which none of you will remember. That was like 91, I think. That idea is the same connotation as the Watts Rebellion. So the Watts Rebellion, the LA Rebellion. Now think about Black Lives Matter. Think about the Baltimore Rebellion. Like once again, a group of people being oppressed. Obviously beaten by the police and being oppressed by police. And this is the reaction, the outcome out of this. You cannot have a group of people suffering without this kind of reaction. It happens all the time. So what came out of this, and this is where Purifoy discovered his aesthetic, his style, was in '66. And the show was called 66 Signs of Neons, where he collected junk. Yeah, and here's the catalog from it. Thank you, Internet, for having something like this, right? That we can just look at the PDF of it. So this is the catalog from it. So he collected signs, junk, and he created art out of it. Him and his artist friends. It wasn't him exclusively. So look at this piece. Now this original Sir Watts is not in the show. What he made was a second one. It was commissioned. And this is the sequel. That's what we'll call it, right? It's a beautiful piece. keep in mind, he always preserved his inner child. A lot of the work has to do, even though there's a social narrative, he never forgot the idea of playing, and that's what he did here. Like, he's really into science fiction, and you can see that there. But look at these beautiful abstract pieces, right? So yeah, you can actually read this entire thing online, right? So it traveled, I think it was 8 different states. Yeah, that's a beautiful piece right there. And so there was a dialogue. The show was reviewed well. And so what happened was that, yeah, look how beautiful that is. Wow, I would like to own something like that, right? But it's just, yeah, well, let's keep going before we run out of time. So, and once again, look right there. That's a reference back to Duchamp, right? The sink. It's a ready-made, but it's pulled out of a rebellion. So, like, think about the dialogue and the implications of that. Like, so cool. So, making these flowers out of like, they look like kind of like hubcap things. So, yeah, like that stuff is great. Um, so he worked as an artist up through 76. And then through 76 up through 87, he worked he was a policymaker for the state of California. So he created a program called Arts and Education. So even though he wasn't quote unquote creating art, doesn't mean he wasn't. I personally believe that he was making art still at the time. It's just that he wasn't. His focus changed. But you can see how he dabbles between the social work and the physical artwork. So this should be like a celebration. The idea of an educator being represented in a large capacity, getting the same respect in the same regard as a Duchamp, right? So this show, you may not appreciate it now because it's just kind of like, you're in school and you absorb a lot of information, but like take photos, document this experience because it's going to be legendary. Like this will be bragging rights for you like in 10 years. So, um, him doing the as a policymaker, it's kind of like when he was working at the. You can relate that back to the Watts Tower work. That's like an idea of where, him doing the social work, him developing artists, him influencing artists. So anyway, up through 87 through 04, Purifoy didn't have any gallery representation, or he wasn't really making any money. And LA in the 80s was impossible to live in unless you were a yuppie and making a slew of money. And what happened was that, so he moved out to Joshua Tree, California, and the Mojave Desert. He acquired 10 acres and just started creating his museum because it's like, well, none of these museums will have my art here in LA. So guess what? I'll just go ahead and make an entire museum out here in the desert. So think about if any of you have a family members that's in their 60s or 70s. Can you imagine them going out collecting junk or trash and then taking it out to the desert, right? And creating these kind of works right here? Like he's in his 60s and 70s doing this. It's insane. So think about this. There's a couple pieces I put on here um, that I wanted to explore with everyone. Oh yeah, real quick. So he died March 5th, 2005, Joshua Tree, California, but he was buried in Rittman, Ohio, because he was in the Navy. So it was um, a national burial for soldiers. So it's cool that he's in Ohio, right? So that's another thing you can remember. So let's look at these pieces real quick. This idea of this welcome entrance. The museum has no walls, but the idea that you're passing through an opening has that same connotation of a building. So it opens up that imagination. You start thinking differently. The idea of these toilets, right? Stacked this way. The idea of this is like, so if you're looking at this close up, you can see it's suspended with cords. But imagine if you were driving by or looking at it from a distance. These objects relate to the idea of weightless. Like how does it sustain its own weight, right? So it's like magical in a lot of ways.